Okay, good. So welcome, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. And this is another Rising Tide Foundation symposium. This is on the role of art in shaping a sovereign citizenry. And it was once better understood that both politics and economics are downstream from culture. Whether the values and passions of a society are tuned to beauty, goodness, and truth, or whether they are tempered by the opposite of these virtues, will say a lot about the aesthetic practices and the creative work of the artists that a society values, and by which that society is in turn shaped. These expressions of art of the soul's journey to maturity is a precondition for any viable nation state, because they give the cultural confidence that is needed for a sovereign citizenry. Now, so far in this series, we've seen various expressions of art and explored. We've looked at Gotthold Lessing's play, Nathan the Wise. We've looked at Robert Frost's poem, Mending Wall. We've looked at Thomas Cole's paintings. We've also looked at Chu Yuan's Ode to the Orange Tree in Chinese culture. We've looked at Sergei Rachmaninoff's music in Russian culture and universal culture, really. And we've also, last week, we looked at Francisco Goya's paintings. So today, we're going to look at this journey through a poem by Friedrich Schiller called The Four Ages of the World. And leading us on this journey will be David Gosselin, who is the founder of the online poetry journal to revive the art of poetic composition by publishing new original works of beauty. It's called The Chained Muse, which everyone should look for. And he's also the founder of the quarterly magazine, The New Lyre, which is a journal of high culture. So without further ado, I'd like to give you Dave Gosselin.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, thank you, everybody. It's nice, always nice to have these Sunday get-togethers. And I wanted to keep this one kind of loose. I'm gonna read a poem. I have a few thoughts, and I think we'll just see what happens. You know, there's a lot of, I thought of many different ways of doing the class. I took notes, like I had thought about, or this presentation for a while. I've been thinking about the ideas, I guess I should say. And every time I tried to put them in a presentation, you know, every time I rehearsed it, it just happened differently. And at a certain point, I got tired of that. I was like, you know what, let's just do it and have fun doing it. So yeah, poetry symposium. The poem that I'm going to read to set the tone, Schiller's going to set the tone for us. So we're not going to be without some anchoring, some mooring. It's called The Four Ages of the World. I guess my first question though is, has anybody in the audience, is anybody familiar with this poem? Four Ages of the World by Schiller. Jerry, that's cheating. I told you about it. But otherwise, okay. And I think I want to read it first and then talk more about why it stands out to me and how I think it's quite relevant for our peculiar times. So this is called The Four Ages of the World, and let's just go from there. So Schiller writes, the glass is a shimmer with purple red wine. The caller's eyes sparkle and glisten. The singer appears. To the good and the fine, he brings forth the best. do you listen? For missing the lyre in the heavenly place, at the nectar meal even, the merryman's base. To him the gods gave a pure, innocent mind that mirrors the world, the unending. He saw all that ever on earth was combined, or hides in the futures pretending. He sat in the primeval God's council board, and the secret most seed of all things overheard. And lusty and shining this life manyfold, he joyfully spreads out before us, adorns as a temple the earthly household, his gift from the muse's sweet chorus. No roof is too lowly, no hut is too small, a sky full of deities comes at his call. As Zeus's son, building his fanciful powers on the face of the shield newly brazen, the earth and sea and the circle of stars with cunning divine did emblazon. So sprints he the form of the ever unbound, in the vanishing instants, fast unrushing sound. He comes from the first age of innocent men, the epoch of youth and of laughter. The happiest wanderer, he mingled again with all folk in all times ever after. 4 ages of man did he witness from nigh, and watches the 5th as it passes him by. First, Saturn was sovereign, strict and straight. Today was the same as tomorrow. The shepherds who lived then, a race free of hate, they loved and they toiled not a whit in the field. The earth gave them all from her bountiful yield. Thereafter came work, and the struggle began, with dragons and monsters and giants. And heroes came forward to rule over man, and the weak sought the mighty's alliance. On fields of Scamander the strife was long hurled, yet beauty was ever the god of the world. Then triumph marched out of the battle and fire, from force blossom mildness perfected. The muses there sang in celestial choir, and statues of gods were erected. The age of divine and fantastical lore has vanished. It cannot return anymore. From heavenly thrones sank the gods of the morn, down tumbled the glorious palace. And lo, to a virgin the Son was born, to heal the frail earth from its malice. The light of the senses was banned and suppressed, and thoughtful, man groped in his inmost breast. And the idle, voluptuous charm disappeared, which the happy young world had begilted. The monk and the nun took the lash and endured, the iron knight joisted and tilted. But though life was ever so gloomy and wild, yet love remained ever more lovely and mild. And the muses an altar both holy and chaste preserved for their silent thanksgiving. And what had been noble and decent, embraced in woman's shy bosom, kept living. The flame of sweet song kindled upward anew, when the troubadours chanted of love so true. Now women and singers must play to sweet bank. They work it and weave it forever, encircling the fair and the just hand in hand, a tie that no mortal can sever. For singing in love, when in beauty and truth, keep life ever bright with the sparkle of youth. The 4 ages of the world. Were people, I guess I need to, it helps to know if people, how people were able to follow in this case. Since we didn't, I don't have the text, this poem wasn't, I couldn't find a good translation online. Any thoughts? What stands out when people, after having heard this? Free associations.
I would have liked to seen it on the screen. That's because it really helps me when I read. It makes comprehension a little better.
No, absolutely. Again,
How
there,
did
I
you
had a book
know,
of it.
if you don't have like a translation, I mean, how did you know the words?
I have the book, but I don't. It's not a. I didn't have a chance to
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
get a printed version.
Okay.
So that's why, yeah, I want to know if anything, or and maybe I'll read it again, and I have some thoughts. But anybody have any thoughts as they heard that? And if just say if you weren't able to.
The
if you
first
feel like
part,
it's- yeah.
I felt like the first part reminded me of Cole's Course of Empire. And then when we went into the second age, I started to, I don't know, this is just me, I lost a little focus.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But
Okay. So yeah, there's the. Again, we also remember kind of the what came first. First thing, our first impressions. It starts with innocence, right? It starts with something pure, or appearance of something pure and innocent, and then things get more complicated, I guess is one way to put it. And I mean, the first thing I'd say is, and I think maybe we can look it over again, go stanza by stanza here, and just appreciate kind of unpacking something like this. But Schiller's looking at the history of mankind, a history of Western civilization, let's say, and lofty enough task. But he's looking at it through the lens of poetry and the different kinds of poetry that arose throughout these different ages. And so I think we can, the last stanza, I guess, is the ultimate, is the guiding hypothesis of this poem, I think, which Schiller captures quite beautifully, right? So when he says, now women and singers must play to sweet banged, they work it and weave it forever, encircling the fair and the just, hand in hand, a tie that no mortal can sever. For singing and love, wed in beauty and truth, keep life ever bright with the sparkle of youth. Now, that stood out to me. I mean, I was just thinking about how today, and this isn't new, but there's obviously, an obsession with staying young, especially we saw this recently. If we're exposed to pop media and culture, however it is, seems like you can't really escape it, right? Especially if you're on social media, so what was one headline that stood out? Like there was the whole Grammys thing. So they're like, Madonna stares at age and blinks, and like she's like a Gorg, she has like a Gorgon thing, at least for now, the puffiness or whatnot. So, but there's this theme, right, of recapturing youth, right? That's in the last presentations, the discussions that I did with Matthew. We're talking a lot about, I've been doing a lot of work on this question of magic, right? You have the magicians in the world of psyops, creating all sorts of illusions and spectacles and things to captivate us. And to shape how we feel about things by choosing the right images and associating that with the right narratives that are conducive to maintaining the powers that be. And so there's a whole industry of magic, right? If we think about the whole idea of the Brave New World and all the different, our Brave New World also inspired, real thing inspired by a book, we could say the other way around as well. But it's all about sort of distracting people and giving them nice things, right? Things to make them feel happy, right? To give them a feeling that they are satisfied, right? That they're happy but really all it is, right? The Soma culture is about pushing down all the other stuff, right? Pushing down all the uncomfortable stuff so that they can be quote unquote happy. Everybody wants to be happy. And especially today, right? That's associated with recapturing the innocence of youth in our fallen world, and modernity and hyper modernity, accelerationism, like just blow it all up already. That's even better. We're too far gone. We got a accelerationism, and things go from like there's all sorts of themes like the past drugs were of like our Brave New World culture were like marijuana or LSD, and now it's the acceleration is like, no, take like speed, take amphetamine, take more things that just keep you going and make everything just go crazy. And so there's all these different there's this fake magic industry, and naturally, I mean, the question that dawned on me, and I mean this is what I realized much poetry treats in many different ways is, well, real magic. What is the nature of this? How do we get a hold? How do we capture the real thing, as Plato would call it, as opposed to imitations of the real thing? And I think that very much we could say that the legacy of evil is really the legacy of imitation. It's all the different ways that we're sort of seduced or tricked into thinking we're getting the real thing, and to invest ourselves in that, right? To really indulge in it, have at it, enjoy the things that you like, find something that you like and da-da-da. And of course, there's always this, the magic always fades, right? It always escapes us. And so I found it interesting that Schiller, he's looking at the development, the evolution of humankind. And he's looking at it through the lens of poetry and the different poetic ages. And he calls it the 4 ages of man. So, the first the poet shows up at the banquet, and he's among the gods. And the poet is blessed with having insight into the divine, and basically living in a realm of timelessness that he can sort of always tap into, where essentially, he's as if, a guest among the gods, among the divine, the heavenly kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. And so then once from there, you get the 4 ages. Schiller says, 4 ages of man did he witness from nigh, and watches the 5th as it passes him by. So the 5th is what he ends with. And so the first Saturn was sovereign, strict and straight. Today was the same as tomorrow. The shepherds who lived then, a race free of hate, felt never a want nor a sorrow. They loved and they toiled, not a whit in the field. The earth gave them all from her bountiful yield. First age, so the age of Kronos, the age of Saturn. This is known as the Golden Age. Hesiod's Works and Days is considered like the model that Schiller and other, this is a poetic theme that's constantly revisited, right? How to divide up the ages of man, the different periods, that different changes in the spirit. We could say the inner world of man, since it's not like, we've really physically evolutionary changed that much, but something has changed. And so this first age, this golden age, is always, hearkened back to as this pure time of innocence. And so it's the age of Saturn. Everything was sort of the same. Mankind and nature were really united. And so you have this same thing. Eden is kind of an example of that. Though something, happens and it then Eden is lost. Thereafter came work, and the struggle began with dragons and monsters and giants. And heroes came forward to rule over man, and the weak sought the mighty's alliance. On fields of Scamander the strife was long hurled, yet beauty was ever the god of the world. As I read this, I see the god of the world. So beauty was the god of the world. And this is the heroic age. This is the age of heroes, the fields of Scamander. Scamander was the river around Troy. So then you get the heroic age, and the gods and men are mingle amongst each other. The finite and infinite, we could say, is literally mingling amongst each other. I think in art, you always have this dance between the finite and the infinite. But what's nice and compelling about the Greeks, and Schiller talks about this, probably where I want to introduce a quote to help us think about how he's thinking about this. But yeah, it's very much embodied. Nature was very much the gods, the divine is embodied, or the infinite is embodied, but as pure God on earth, infinite, and mortals kind of dancing, having babies, doing all sorts of things, fighting, being jealous. So the gods are very human in that sense. They're very mortal, ironically, in their behaviors. And so Schiller talks about this, and I guess I feel this is a relevant theme when I think about, especially in the last presentation, we talked about enchantment, which is the early childhood, the magic of childhood, the magic of youth. And then you have the disenchantment. So you have this period where that youth is lost, and there's a certain mourning or longing or grieving, and there's an attempt to get it back. And so I think the question is, how do we get it back? How does art, how is poetry perhaps not just a tool, but really art and poetry is really one of the secrets of recapturing this and of awakening it, of discovering it in ourselves. Is there a way to grow younger and grow older? Right? Is it possible to grow younger and yet grow wiser in our wisdom? And Schiller addresses much of this, and there's different ways we could go here. And I think I'll surprise myself, which maybe I don't know where. Let's see what happens next. Let's keep going with the poem, and I'd like to just make some observations about the changes in mankind, and where this leaves us today, and how do we, always with the idea of how do we capture this magic, how do we regain this wonder, which we're told in the modern age is like gone, right? That's another, we're told it's like, no, you can't get it anymore. You got to just blow it all up, and we have to go back to Matt gave a class on the pre-Raphaelites, right? This isn't a new thing. We got to put the genie back in the bottle, get rid of all the dirty technology, this sinful, degrading pollution. And we need to go back to, pre-Renaissance times, when to more quote unquote traditional times, when, humanity's relationship with Mother Nature was more sustainable. Babies didn't have that great luck, when it came to survival. You had a couple of people, they were the gatekeepers, the blue bloods, and, culture. We're told they had great culture. A lot of it, though, was them trying to embellish themselves, and there happened to be good things that came as a result of that, because there was genius, and the bad guys do like nice things. So and we should all like nice things. There's nothing wrong with that. But the question is, what's the greater purpose? So Schiller wrote, "Thereafter came work, and the struggle began with dragons and monsters and giants, and heroes came forward to rule over man, and the weak sought the mighty's alliance. On fields of Scamander the strife was long hurled, yet beauty was ever the god of the world. Then triumph marched out of the battle and fire, from force blossom mildness perfected. The muses there sang in celestial choir, and statues of gods were erected. The age of divine and fantastical lore has vanished. It cannot return anymore. And so this is classical, the classical age, right? The classical Greek age. We think of, I mean, as he says it, the statues of gods were erected. You know, we all maybe have the image of Apollo and all these statues of the muses and the gods. Beautiful stuff, right? These timeless beings, or an image of timelessness captured in stone, frozen in time, but also in the image of men and women. And so there's an idea of the divine and the earthly meeting, definitely being embodied in a man, in human beings. You have Hercules, which is an interesting one. You have the 12 labors of Hercules, and that's a big one, which I was looking for sources, you know, where does it originally come from? And it's apparently from, scholars say, a lost epic, right? The 12 labors of Hercules. So Hercules has to, he's doing penance because he was driven mad by the jealous Juno, and he killed his wife and children. And, you know, but then Apollo understood that it wasn't technically his fault, but there should still be some opportunity for atonement. And so he's given the 12 labors. You know, he's got to slay the Hydra, he's got to fight the lion. And there's definitely this classical idea of the divine, right, where courage and honor and glory, and that, I mean, these are good things, right? Like you kind of get out there. There's physical labor, but it's also spiritual labor. You know, Hercules is not just, you know, fighting the boar and taming the lion and slaying the Hydra just out of brute strength, like some, you know, Philistine, but he's using his insight, it's like it's a natural genius, right? He's not like an intellectual in an armchair and like, well, let's see what we can, you know, he's getting in there. And so there's definitely a, not nostalgia, but today I think there's a longing. That's a popular theme compared to like modern man. You know, like they'll say modern man is haunted in his office space, you know, the spiritual cubicle, as I like to call it, right? It's a spiritual cubicle. There's a cubicle, but it's really a spiritual cubicle. And so this idea of, especially when things are, you know, in the Western world, we could say things have been relatively peaceful as far as like in our domain, we've been raising hell elsewhere. But the idea is it's been peaceful, and it makes hard times make strong men, and, you know, good times make weak men. That's what they say. So by there not being any challenge or any serious threat, people become soft. And that's not good. It's true that that's not good. We can see that it's not healthy, you know. Having had office jobs and whatnot, there's definitely something that you can see. It breaks people's spirit, because it's not really natural. And I know, just because I'm someone that needs to move and I like to go to the gym and stuff, and if I don't train after a while and I'm just in front of a screen, this isn't right. So there's something nice about this classical aesthetic and classical ideal. But now there's a change that comes in the poem. A different age arises. So just to read the previous stanza, then triumph marched out of the battle and fire. From forest blossom mildness perfected. The muses there sang in celestial choir, and statues of gods were erected. The age of divine and fantastical lore has vanished. It cannot return anymore. From heavenly thrones sank the gods of the morn. Down tumbled the glorious palace. And lo, to a virgin, the sun was born, to heal the frail earth from its malice. Delight of the senses was banned and suppressed, and thoughtful, man groped in his inmost breast. There's some interesting changes that happen with the advent of Christ intervening, you know, Christianity. And well, there's so much we could say. So in the Greek idea, I mean, the infinite and the finite is always mingling. The gods are on earth, the gods are, and mortals are together. And at the same time, so with Christianity, the gods disappear, right? As Schiller says, the age of divine and fantastical lore has vanished. It cannot return anymore. I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, right? There's an idea that it's, especially in like the quote unquote traditionalist or you know, certain conservative leaning folk, the idea is like, we just got to go back. Like we just got to, you know, do things like we used to do, you know, and so, you know, the masses aren't in Latin. Well, that's there you go. That's why everything's, you know, people or, you know, we just need to like redo certain things and then things are going to somehow go back to normal, quote unquote. But there's definitely the image of godliness changes, right? The Christ is the word, logos, made flesh. And I mean, I was thinking about, we can say a lot about classical Greece, and I mean, we can, and there's a lot to say, and we should. But it also, you know, with the death of Socrates and everything, there weren't the philosopher kings were nowhere to be seen, right? You know, I was just thinking about ancient Greece and all this great heritage and tradition, but like, what is Greece doing today? You know, it's not exactly like a bastion of classical thought, and like, where's all the new great classical art? So there's definitely there's something that was lost, and it wasn't preserved, at least not, it's certainly not there in the idea that we have. But the godly did, in a sense, with Christianity, you see that it's really about the word made flesh and imitating the word made flesh, right? It's about acting, walking in the image of Christ, which is God made man. And that brings in all sorts of God, man, and all sorts of theological paradoxes. But the question is really about imitating the divine, right? That's ultimately what it comes down to. Our understanding of, I'll admit somebody here, our understanding of God, divinity, is really an ontological statement about the nature of man. It's really, it's wrestling with trying to understand the nature of man. And so we see a change with Christ in the qualities, right? It's Christ is not, he's not a strong man, right? It's Jesus meek and humble of heart, right? It's really, the qualities are, it's about humility, right? It's about love, and it is much gentler than, and much less fickle than and you could say less heroic in the Greek heroic sense of the word. Like, it's not Hercules fighting hydras per se, we could say. In many ways, arguably is. And so, right, so we can maybe look at a bit of it. So what is the poetry? I would like to, let's take some examples of the poetry from these ages before we. It's a bit of a, it's a lofty poem. So I think if we just have to go through it all, then work backwards, it might be, it could be more of a strain than if we just kind of pace ourselves. So I just picked two quotes, things that stood out. The poetry, we'll start in the middle. Why not? We'll start in the middle, the poetry of the New Testament. And I was thinking, because Schiller talks about there, for each of these ages, there's poetry. What is the poetry in the time of Christ, in the early Christian era? And there's two quotes that I was thinking of. First, you have, and this is from Hebrews 12, verses 13 to 11, it says here. So in the Hebrews, it says, "My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be wary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. Now, this is, this isn't the first thing you think of when you think of, regaining childhood innocence and youth and just nice, beautiful things, nice things, right? Why can't we, no nice things anymore? How do we get nice things? And so here, we're talking about chastising and penance, but that God, the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. But then I was thinking, Jesus said quite a few things, quite a few profound things. And this is another contrasting quote that always stayed with me. And so I'll just read this. This is Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, "I tell you the truth. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me." One is very stern and adult-like, right? And Paul says, this is the third and last. Paul writes, this is chapter 13, 1 Corinthians. Paul writes, "When I was a child, I used to speak as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things." So in one place, when I was a child, I used to speak like a child. When I was a man, I put away childish things. And yet Jesus says, to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must be like children. How is that possible? Is it possible to grow younger and grow older at the same time? And how do we get there? And so I would like interlude on one of Schiller's aesthetic ideas that I think will be insightful into this poem, to the first half of this poem. And I guess reflecting on where we stand here, modern man, in our modern world. And how do we learn to become like children again, per se, but grown-up children. And so Schiller has this very, very compelling piece called On Naive and Sentimental Poetry. And he talks about the idea of the naive. And, today, cynical modern man, the naive, right? Like you're going to get killed, man. Don't be stupid. Don't do anything stupid, which is true. But there's also, at the same time, there's something cynical about the natural innocence and goodness of just doing the right thing because it's right and speaking the truth because it's true, as opposed to, things get more complicated, people get older, there's a society, there's a bunch of rules, and things become much more contrived, much more rehearsed, and for many people, much more fake. Right. And it's kind of almost suffocating that everybody's kind of following a set of rules, right? There's like a playbook, a set of unspoken rules, and everybody's just got to play by the rules. And so Schiller talks about this important in art. One of the important kinds of art or set qualities in art is this idea of the naive. And I'm just going to read a bit of this. And I think it's the point will be driven home. There are moments in our life When we dedicate a kind of love and touching respect to nature in its plants, minerals, animals, landscapes, just as to human nature and its children, in the morals of country folk and of the primeval world, not because it is pleasing to our senses, not even because it satisfies our understanding or taste, the opposite can often occur in respect to both, but rather merely because it is nature. Every fine man who does not altogether lack feeling experiences this when he walks in the open, when he lives upon the land or tarries beside monuments of ancient times. In short, when he is surprised in artificial relations and situations with the sight of simple nature. It is interest, not seldom elevated to need, which lies at the foundation of many of our fancies for flowers and animals, for simple gardens, for walks, for the country and its inhabitants, for many products of remote antiquity, provided that neither affectation nor an accidental interest in it be in play. Just, oh, how nice is that? This kind of interest in nature takes place, however, only under two conditions. First, it is entirely necessary that the object which infuses us with the same be nature, or certainly be held by us, therefore. Second, that it, in the broadest meaning of the word, be naive, i.e., that nature stand in contrast with art and shame her. And now he gives a beautiful example. If one could give to an artificial flower, by means of the most perfect deception, the appearance of nature, if one could carry the imitation of the naive in morals up to the highest illusion, so would the discovery that it be imitation completely destroy the feeling of which we are speaking. From this, it is clear that this kind of pleasure in regard to nature is not aesthetical, but rather moral, for it is produced by means of an idea. Also, it by no means depends upon the beauty of forms. What would even a plain flower, a spring, a mossy stone, the chirping of birds, the buzzing of bees, have in itself so charming for us? What could it give in any claim upon our love? It is not these objects, it is an idea represented through them, which we love in them. We love in them the quietly working life, the calm effects from out itself, existence under its own laws, the inner necessity, the eternal unity with itself. Just close with this paragraph. They are what we were. They are what we ought to become once more. One more line, skipping a few. They afford us, therefore, the entirely peculiar pleasure that they, without shaming us, are our model. And he goes on. So this idea of the pure, the naive, which can be kindled, things like children or a flower, right? And we can I think of Eden, is another one. Time of innocence. There's a bit of shaming in the Eden part, right? But it's also, I think we're thinking it a slightly different idea. And so now going forward, so there's this age, and Schiller here in this poem, he says the age of divine and fantastical lore has vanished, right? And this was also an age when beauty was still the god of the world. It cannot return anymore. Much in the same way, the Garden of Eden, we're in a fallen world, is it really the idea of just going back to Eden, where it's really like, they're like children, right? They're purely innocent, they don't even notice that they're naked, right? Which is kind of funny. I remember stories where you'll hear like the kids the young children babies, they'll just walk into the, not babies, but even toddlers, you know, they're just naked and they don't care, and they just walk into a room. And it's like, no, honey, you can't do that. We gotta put clothes on you, right? Schiller makes the point though, and the naive, not in the good way, but the naive or the less thoughtful person, right, or the aspire to fake magic, it's almost as if they wish they could just have, they want to recapture the magic of youth, that innocence and carelessness also, but you know, they're later careless, you know, the raucous, you know, whatever, college days or whatever it is, for people, that age of carefreeness and innocence before, you know, I guess you could, God chastised them and they learned a couple lessons, as we all must. But yeah, so there's the one mistaken Schiller talks about where they literally think about the child, right? He says, they afford us, therefore, the entire peculiar pleasure that they, without shaming us, are our model. A constant divine appearance, they surround us, but more refreshingly than dazzlingly. What constitutes their character is precisely that which is lacking in ours to be complete. What distinguishes us from them is precisely that which is missing in them to be divine. We are free, and they are necessary. We change, they remain the same. But only when both are united with one another, when the will freely obeys the laws of necessity, and with all change of imagination, reason maintains its rule, does the divine or the ideal issue forth. We therefore perceive in them eternally that which is missing from us, but after which we are required to strive, and which, although we never attain it, we nevertheless may hope to approach in an infinite progress. I will read one more quote on that. Do anybody have thoughts? If there's anything, because I have one more quote I'll read. But is this idea clear that it's not literally about becoming the thing again? It's the idea. As Schiller says, it's a moral idea. If we knew that the flower was fake, it doesn't matter how real it was. It doesn't matter how good the imitation. It's not the real thing. And knowing it's not the real thing would mean that it loses all its value or its magic, really.
David?
I
Sorry, I just wanted to mention to people, I've put the 4 images in the chat, in the meeting chat, that are the poem, the 4 ages. So.
Oh, you found, okay.
I found them.
Je te remercie. So yeah, it's the idea of this freedom and necessity. Because yeah, Schiller makes the point that in a child or in the flower, it's not by merit. They can only be what they are. You know, good job being the kid, Billy. That's not really a thing. You know, they're just being kids. But again, you know, Christ says, to enter the kingdom of heaven, we must be like children. And yet we must put aside childish things. I will read one more quote before continuing in the poem. And this is by C.S. Lewis. And this is from his sermon called The Weight of Glory. The weight of glory being of the awe, of the childlike awe that's necessary in a truly spiritual and fulfilled life. So, and I'm staring at my screen here, so sorry if I look like I'm staring into the camera. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that had settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify it with certain moments in his past. But all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. So we can look back to the past, whether our own childhood or these things, right, as we're all wont to do, or as, I mean, that's a big theme in also just pop culture, right? The innocence. What's that song? Katy Perry, Teenage Dream, right? That's a big one. You know, it's got like 1.2 billion views, and the lyrics don't come to me, the music does, but so I won't try singing it. But there's a lot of that, you know, or Taylor Swift. So much of this, you know. If anybody knows the song, they could sing it. It's okay. We won't shame you. Read poetry. Okay. So let's go back to the poem. From heavenly throne sank the gods of the morn, down tumbled the glorious palace, and lo, to a virgin the sun was born, to heal the frail earth from its malice. The light of the senses was banned and suppressed, and thoughtful, man groped in his inmost breast. So I really think that epistles of Paul really always get to that. And the next stanza, and the idol voluptuous charm disappeared, which the happy young world had begilted. The monk and the nun took the lash and endured. The iron knight joisted and tilted. But though life was ever so gloomy and wild, yet love remained evermore lovely and mild. She's talking about the medieval, one more stanza, just getting at the more medieval idea that's often associated with enchantment, right? The enchanted times of damsels in distress and magic and Merlin, and also fighting dragons. And next stanza goes, and the muses an altar both holy and chaste preserve for their silent thanksgiving, and what had been noble and decent, embraced in woman's shy bosom, kept living. The flame of sweet song kindled upward anew, when the troubadours chanted of love so true. Oh yes, okay, so man is being softened, right? And there's more of it compared to the earlier Greek, you know, more kind of strong man, or just very strong Bronze Age heroes and glory and honor, all good things. But here things are being chastened, right? There's been some chastising, right? God has been chastising man because he loves man, and there's a few things that need to be learned, right? And there's no way around it. I still don't think people should spank their kids, but we understand that, you know, the idea. So let's compare. Okay, so and the muses an altar both holy and chaste preserve for their silent thanksgiving, and what had been noble and decent, embraced in woman's shy bosom, kept living. The flame of sweet song kindled upward anew, when the troubadours chanted of love so true. And so that brings us to the, what does that sound like? What does that actually look like? You know, where are we in the timeless poetical world, poetical matrix of the soul of mankind? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And I mean, the pinnacle of the troubadour tradition, it culminates with Dante, the Italian school inspired by the Provençal school, which had only been around for not that long, as Dante points out here, and I'll read something. Then these are vernacular languages, as Dante makes the distinction. They're not the learned language of the grammarians, right? They're really the language of the people, in a sense. And he points out that these languages have not been spoken for very long. Provençal was not around for that long. Let me find this passage here. Okay. Sorry, I did a bunch of folded pages and now I'm just looking for the right one. Bear with me. I'm sure I've had it. Just some pure sweat soaking. Okay, well, we're just gonna, let's start here. I'm gonna read a bit from the Vita Nuova, which is Dante's early, it's called The New Life, right? And this is a very famous oeuvre in the poetical development of the soul of humanity. And I think it really captures, if we do a contrast, I want to start with this one. Rewind to ancient Greece for a second. I want people, I'd like to hear maybe people's thoughts on this. Sappho, the greatest of the ancient poets, known as the 10th Muse by Plato himself, called the 10th Muse by Plato himself. That's a pretty big compliment. So let me just read some fragments and we'll see what is Sappho's main theme. So this is fragment 16. Warriors on rearing chargers, columns of infantry, fleets of warships. Some say, these are the dark earth's redeeming visions, but I say, the one I desire. And this makes sense, because she who so vastly surpassed all mortals in beauty, Helen, seduced by Aphrodite, led astray by desire, set sail for distant Troy, abandoning her celebrated husband, leaving behind her parents and child. Her story reminds me of Anactoria, who has also departed, and whose lively dancing and lovely face I would rather see than all the horsemen and war chariots of the Lydians, or all their infantry parading in flashing armor. Oof. That's pretty gripping. I don't know about you guys, that's impressive. This is a fragment. Let's just read a few more and see why is she so held esteemed. I'd like to, just to get a flavor of how she's treating. Seduced by Aphrodite, right? So seduced by love. Oh yes, here's a good one. And this is a semi kind of modern translation, but actually a pretty good one in capturing what Sappho's doing here. And there's a little commentary before that I'll read. Commentary after. So this is the Ode to Anactoria, fragment 31 by Sappho. How can I compete with this damned man who fancies himself one of the gods, impressing you with his eloquence, when just the thought of sitting in your radiant presence, of hearing your lovely voice and lively laughter, sets my heart hammering at my breast. Hell, when I catch just a quick glimpse of you, I'm left speechless, tongue-tied, and immediately a blush like a delicate flame reddens my skin. Then my vision dims with tears. My ears ring. I sweat profusely, and every muscle in my body trembles. When the blood finally settles, I grow paler than summer grass, till in my exhausted madness, I'm as limp as the dead. And yet I must risk all, being bereft without you. And the comment below, this longer poem survives only because the ancient critic Longinus quoted it as a supreme example of poetic intensity. In On the Sublime, an ancient work of literary criticism, Longinus spoke with admiration of Sappho's ability to communicate longing. Are you not amazed at how she evokes soul, body, hearing, tongue, sight, skin, as though they were external and belonged to someone else? And how at one and the same moment, she both freezes and burns, is irrational and sane, is terrified and nearly dead, so that we observe in her not a single emotion, but a whole concourse of emotions. Such things do, of course, commonly happen to people in love. Sappho's supreme excellence lies in the skill with which she selects the most striking and vehement circumstances of the passions and forges them into a coherent whole. One more. There's writing on that. Okay. You're the sweetest apple, Sappho, fragment 105, Sappho. You're the sweetest apple reddening on the highest bough, which the harvesters missed or forgot somehow. Or perhaps they just couldn't reach you then or now. Oh, this is the one I forgot. This was the main one. Sorry. Fragment 47. Eros harrows my heart. Wild winds whipping desolate mountains, uprooting oaks. Eros harrows my heart. Wild winds whipping desolate mountains, uprooting oaks. That is one hell of an image. The oak is like the old, hard wood, just impossible, to break ancient thing. And just Eros rips it all out from the mountains. And so what kind of idea of love is being treated here is what I think is interesting, right? We talk about in the ancients, right? Eros is something that possesses people, right? That takes over. And I mean, it's not going away. But so that was a big thing. Now, as Schiller writes, from heavenly thrones sank the gods of the morn, down tumbled the glorious palace, and lo, to a virgin the sun was born, to heal the frail earth from its malice. The light of the senses was banned and suppressed, and thoughtful, man groped in his inmost breast, and the idle, voluptuous charm disappeared, which the happy young world had begilted. The monk and the nun took the lash and endured, the iron knight joisted and tilted. But though life was ever so gloomy and wild, yet love remained ever more lovely and mild. And the muses an altar both holy and chaste preserved for their silent thanksgiving. And what had been noble and decent, embraced in woman-shy bosom, kept living. The flame of sweet song kindled upward anew, when the troubadours chanted of love so true. Now, how does Dante, supreme or premier of love poets of the, I guess we could say, post-classical age, modern Christian age, we could call it. Dante relates his experience of love, of being taken over by something. And I think it's interesting to compare how, keeping in mind what Sappho just did there, or did 2,600 years ago, but it's still fresh. So the first one I'll read. Oh, there's a lot of good ones here. We'll just have a bit of fun, and people, if people have thoughts or comments, I'll read a few, and then just people, if they want to jump in before we get to the last part of the poem and see what happens. So this is the first sonnet in the Vita Nuova. What's going to happen? To every captive soul and gentle lover, into whose sight this present rhyme may chance, that writing back, each may expound its sense. Greetings is in love, who is their Lord, I offer. Already of those hours, a third was over, wherein all stars display their radiance, when lo, love stood before me in my trance. Calling what he was fills me with horror. Joyful love seemed to me, and in his keeping, he held my heart. And in his arms, there lay my lady, in a mantle wrapped, and sleeping. Then he awoke her, and, her fear not heeding, my burning heart fed to her reverently. Then he departed from my vision, weeping. It's the first one, strange, mysterious. You know, what's love up to? What's love up to? What's going on here? We'll do like 2, 3 more. They're very short, just so that we have a idea of progression and what's going on in Dante's mind. So this is, the first one was I just read the first. Now this is section 9 of the Vita Nuova. It's like 5 poems in. As I rode forth one day not long ago, pensive about my journey and distressed, I met love like a traveler, humbly dressed, coming along my path, forlorn and slow. Such wretchedness his aspect seemed to show. He might have been a monarch dispossessed. With thoughtful steps and sighing he progressed, his gaze averted and his head held low. When he caught sight of me, he called my name and said, "From far away I bring your heart where it has dwelt, according to my will, and take it, a new service to fulfill." Then I absorbed of him so great a part, he vanished just as strangely as he came. Also mysterious. What is up with love? What is, I mean, is this relationship advice? What is this? You know, what am I supposed to do with this? Okay, something strange is beginning to possess him. Where does this go? So we'll read 2 more. This is interesting. So, love and a noble heart are but one thing. Even as the wise man tells us in his rhyme, the wise man being his mentor, Guido Guincinelli, love and a noble heart are but one thing. even as the wise man tells us in his rhyme, the one without the other venturing, as well as reason, from a reasoning mind. Nature, disposed to love, creates love king, making the heart a dwelling place for him, wherein he lies quiescent, slumbering, sometimes a little, now a longer time. Then beauty in a virtuous woman's face pleases the eyes, striking the heart so deep, a yearning for the pleasing thing may rise. Sometimes so long it lingers in that place, love's spirit is awakened from his sleep. By a worthy man, a woman's moved likewise. A notable theme here in the medieval times as well is that love and the divine and the sacred, it comes through the eyes. The eyes are really the gate to the soul. So whatever's going to come possess you, it's going to jump through your eyes, and that's where you get caught. And that's also why, you know, a lot of, you know, depending cultural traditions and whatnot, the eyes, right, you know, whether cover up one way or another, because even a little, even a little bit, you know, there's a temptation there. So there's this idea that you gotta, you know, really cover it all up, and sight is very sacred, you know, so like one really, you know, there's the idea that like the images have to be carefully chosen in society. The images that are paraded around and that are held up and that are celebrated, because it's the eyes, right? It's that the sight of these things is what will take us over, or it can take us over. And I'll just read one last one that captures actually, what am I doing? I translated this one. I like my translation. Just for a certain turn of phrase. Bear with me. There we go. 0124. Pardonnez-moi for the delay. There we go. This one's called Tanto onesta e tanto gentile. There it is. And just so people get the flavor of this one, I'll read it both in English and Italian, and then we can move on, finish the poem. So, tanto gentile e tanto onesta pare. So gentle. And this is 26 in the sections of the Vita Nuova. So gentle and so honest seems my lady, wherever and whenever she meets others, that every other tongue's beset with tremors, and eyes lose all their strength and power to see. She makes her way, receiving praises humbly, with graces showering down all around her, sent down to earth, with miracles to offer, among the many spheres of the worldly. Such joy finds the soul lucky to perceive the one who through our eyes imparts her sweetness, which without being felt cannot be surmised. And it seems that upon her lips there resides a spirit's love, which appears also boundless, whispering into the depths of our souls. Breathe. There we are. That's it. What's interesting about this one, we start to get this theme. of the tenderness, the gentleness, and the virtue, right? Love is not a maddening thing, not in the same sense, right, as Sappho. And there's a change. There's a change in the heart of man in terms of what we associate with the beautiful and the good and the true. And for Dante, this is, embodied in his visions of love. Any thoughts, or before I go on, anything that comes to mind, or? Okay.
Well, I had a question. I'm always
You're
intrigued.
scratching your head.
Yeah. When did Schiller write the poem, The Four Ages? Do you know?
Juste comme ça, je connais pas. I don't know, but I'm sure I can get it. I'd assume it's one of his like middle or later periods, just by the way he's thinking about it. But I can probably.
Okay.
Four Ages of the World.
I'm always intrigued about what in at that time in the world, in the place where he was living, and in the world, what could have brought him to have the what was the reason for the poem? Why did he do it then, and what maybe had triggered this line of thinking? Obviously a lot preceded his whole philosophical historical works are kind of like there's you can see in the poem that there are things that are referenced, things that are found elsewhere that he's been thinking about before, but that are a poem is condensed. It's really
Dichtung, as they say, German meaning condense, literally. To condense. The German word for poetry is Dichtung. It's
that's
has
right.
to do with
That's it.
condensing.
Cool. Yeah. Exactly. So I was just wondering when this was composed, and also
Right.
you mentioned like the different the Greeks poets, the modern post-classical modern poets, like you're making these links also to what Schiller is saying. I'm just wondering to what extent he what he was taking from all of them, like consciously, or what
I mean,
references, like in music you also have a lot of references. Beethoven is going to quote Mozart, he's going to quote Bach, so in the same way, I'm just wondering, maybe you said it already and I missed that part, I'm sorry.
I mean, we're not done.
Yeah.
But and just to make sure
that in the universe and see what answers.
I think this poem is fun because it forces us to get into the mind of Schiller, to actually think as he was thinking about things and how he was thinking about things, because he stood at an interesting turning point in history. I mean, technically there's a lot of interesting turning points in history, but like these ages that we still in 17th 18th centuries, like we'll still look back to the ancient Greeks, or people will talk about early the high church medieval period, or I mean, you could the time of Jesus, right, which technically wasn't a great time. I mean, he wouldn't have come if that was the whole point, right? So it couldn't have been that good. Do we really want to go back to that? Teachings were important, and that's what's but he came not because things were great, and the classical wisdom had been by and large lost, right? Well, that's not true, but it transformed, right? It evolved. And there was a humility. I think the image of godliness was much more, I mean, in the sense it became more human, right? More humble. And that was actually one of the greatest strengths, right? Was the humility, to have the humility, the strength to humble oneself, as opposed to, just like this kind of more heroic idea of like glory and honor, and all these things are good, but it's not like, Troy and, the rhetoricians, it wasn't that hard to whip people up into a frenzy, You're okay with having a cuckolded king? He's ran off with the other girl, and like, this is your king. This is who rules over you. You're gonna let these people disrespect you, like you guys are a bunch of, whatever. Fill in the blank. It wasn't that hard to put these people into, what today the magicians and the hypnotists, altered states. Get them all worked up and get them insecure, and then like, we got to fight them. We got no choice. They ran away with the girl, Helen. So there's a weakness there, right? If that's your idea of like, if you're pride, right? It's more about pride, and the honor is, so it's a tricky thing. Versus the humility, I think that's a lot more powerful. And Schiller here is obviously, he's saying a lot of things were, from the heavenly throne sank the gods of the morn, down tumbled the glorious palace, and lo, to a virgin the sun was born, to heal the frail earth from its malice. The light of the senses was banned and suppressed, and thoughtful, man groped in his inmost breast. The light of the senses was banned and suppressed, and thoughtful man groped in his inmost breast. Yeah, I mean, beauty, Schiller talks about this as well in his idea of the sublime. So I think all his philosophical ideas are kind of woven in a pretty interesting way here, in that beauty is nice, but if we just live in a world of beauty, nice things, right? And we think of the empires and the emperors, and they like to adorn themselves. It's very lavish and boisterous, and there's all gold everywhere. We think like Baroque Rome, there's all these nice things. And so there's a period of like, you got to get to the real thing, like, what about the inner beauty? And how do you get in touch with that such that you're not distracted by pleasing imitations, pleasing outward clever imitations of that thing, which in truth, even the most beautiful forms, outward, external, or whatnot, are there to remind us of something deeper, right? Are there to awaken something in us? They're reminders, I think. And I think this poetry is a friendly reminder, right? Art is a reminder of that deeper something inside of us.
Oh, David, can I say something?
Yeah.
Do you want to finish?
No, go ahead.
Well, no, getting back to those love poems, I think I love the whole Troubadour, the chivalry and all that kind of the amour part of love. But when I was listening to you read the ancient ones, the Greeks, that eros, or if there's such a, you feel it so much, you see, that as with Dante, it's more telling us about amour, more than, it doesn't evoke as much. I'd love to have more evoking of that amour, the feeling of amour, as the poem with the Greeks, where you really feel the eros, or you know what I'm saying, the intensity of that feeling. So yeah. I think that's the only two differences for myself as I was listening.
Well, can I say something too?
Yeah.
Well, okay, briefly. I was just saying that, it really does, the ages really do translate to the maturation process of a person. And you know, there's a fixation process going on in this sapphic poem, you know, to the physical or the bodies, and that fixation is extremely intense and beautifully written. But at some point, there has to be less focus on the materialistic, and more and to the spiritual, to the humility in
Well,
terms of maturation.
Can't you
right?
have both though? You know,
I think that you
and
can't
or,
have the. I
and
think the
and.
fixation has to be. I think the fixation has to be, unfortunately, chastised.
Can we
Just
both,
from my experience.
can we both be, you know, children in the kingdom of heaven, and also, you know, as Paul says, you know, when as a
Okay.
child I love childish things, but I became a man, I put aside childish things. Right, and Schiller talks about this with the naive, and that it's not, we're not trying to become children again, but the children have something, they're a reminder of something that we must, they are what we were, and they are what we must become once more.
Well,
And I
not
think-
only that, as a child, like you know, age-wise, but children know how to receive. Like, you know, they don't, you tell them, okay, I'm going to give you something, I'm going away, but I'll bring you this. They just believe. And I think that ability just to receive so purely is, to me, especially indicative in the Bible of what Jesus meant to become a child. You know, like we don't believe everything that the Bible says. We really don't receive it. And I think that takes a lot of humility.
I will say just the thought that you're triggering, that had been think it's also in, sure makes the point that genius is always naive, in that it's very intuitive and it has a simplicity, you know, and the naive is not just the child doing whatever, but let's say in a moment with all the sorts of conventions and like the emperor's new clothes kind of thing, right? Where the kid just points out the obvious, that you're speaking to something true and in a sense higher in its simplest form, right? There's a sublime simplicity and childlike wonder to truth and to the mysteries, right? The mystery of our own soul, the mystery of the universe, right? These things don't go away. Arguably, the magic is all about discovering those things, that the mysteries become clearer to us, right? That we each do have a soul, a unique soul, right? And we're all creative and have this art, an image of the divine, a living image of God, of the divine, and have a creative spark.
And also too, like in the Bible, it says he knew us before the foundation of the world. And so that memory, so as a child, they probably are complete in that memory. And, you know, they remember what heaven was like, that perfect form and perfect being. And then they come born into the earth, and we slowly forget. And so that also is part of, I think, the meaning of, you know, because a lot of things is really remembering what we already have.
That's
I
a good
don't know.
thought. And yeah, I think that's a good. Now let's hold these thoughts. I
David,
think, yeah.
I know that Vincent had his hand.
Oh yeah, I'm okay. Go ahead. I'm just yeah, I'm not good at following the. Go ahead. Come on down, Vincent.
Hi, David. Hi, how are you doing? Sorry, I didn't interrupt. I know you were
No.
on a flow. Yeah, it did seem you know, there is a concept of like the 3 stages of I think Nathan was talking about, you know, the maturation of consciousness within an individual, and you know, at the simple first stage, where we are in what's classed as participation mystique, where we're just in, the child is just in the world, in nature. You know, indigenous people, like I've lived with some tribes, and they can't see any separation. They're just in nature. It's magical. It's really magical for them. And then in the maturation, we move from that simple stage to what's classed as complex man. And in complexity, everything is opposite. So it's like whatever, you know, Democrats, Republicans, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. It's the world is just all these opposites and choices, and it's very complex. So we get lost in all that complexity. It's like Hamlet, you know, to be or not to be. We just can't make up. Even if we make a choice, we never know if that choice is true or not. So there's this whole second stage of complexity that we get into, and that a lot of the poetry can be in that we're just lost in the, you know, the love of, you know, whatever, and trying to make a love, you know, do I love this person? I'm married, but I also love another person, or, you know, it's everything. It's, oh, I love my work, but I also love myself, and I need time for myself. You just can't, it's not a great time. And then the final stage is, if you get there, is classed as enlightened man, where in the complexity of that second stage, something shines through as another way of being outside the complexity. There's something that just touches us. And I think the art, the poetry, the music, it is a way of that third stage just literally shining through. So in the complexity, you go, wow, there is another way of being in the world. And what we do, and I think in that complexity, we try and grasp it. So we look at the art, we read a poem, or we're in nature. We just want to hold on to that moment of bliss. That's just like, but of course you can't get it. It's elusive. It goes. And but that's enough. That little moment is enough to kind of tug us and pull us into the third stage, which is the stage of enlightenment. But for me, that's the full arc. So in simple, the first stage, simple man, we're in nature, we're in the garden, we're in Eden, and then we go out into complexity. And the serpent, that's the whole idea for me. That what the serpent says in the garden is, right, now you have knowledge, now you understand good and evil. So the world splits into opposites.
There's a duality.
Yeah, there's a duality. You've all of a sudden, from oneness, you've gone into duality. So in complexity, you're in the world of opposites, right, of good and evil, which is where we are in civilization at the moment. Now, to me, what's tugging at us is the next stage. And I think the poets, the artists and all, it's nature, but it's also the ecstatic feminine. So the ecstatic feminine is beyond the human, and a lot of the art and the poetry and the is actually beyond human. It's no human could hold what you're talking about here. You know, no one human. It's just so it's so pure. You know, that the feelings that you have are just beyond. And I think that's so. In essence, there's a very simple thing though that shows us where civilization is, which is the first stage in simple terms. Is unconscious. When you're a child, you're unconscious. You're in participation state, like indigenous people. You're just not conscious. You're there. When you're in the second stage of complexity and the opposites, your psyche has fragmented, and the minute your psyche fragments, you're unconscious. Now we all think we're conscious, but you're not. The minute you go into that point of is it this or something else, you've gone unconscious. So for just the majority of civilization, the gods, the whole lot, it's actually been either simple man or complex man. It's very hard to say this, you know, honestly, but actually it's all been unconscious. And if you look at the world today, like any civilization that gets itself to the precipice of suicide is unconscious. There's no way you would consciously do that. There's no way you would consciously arrive at the point we're at today. So the next stage, the third stage, enlightenment man, is the only stage that's conscious. It's the only stage that's conscious. And so this is why we're trembling at the end of like the exhaustion of ideologies, the exhaustion of cultures, the exhaustion of, I read an article on science, the whole, there's been no disruptive science for the last 30 years. There's been nothing that has disrupted. So we're at the end of that, like struggling on to go, we'll do it by will, we'll do it heroically, we'll do it by whatever, it's gone.
Yeah.
So this new thing of, we can consciously walk back into the garden, consciously engage with nature. But we have to do it consciously. We can't create something that says, let's create an electric car that links into, destroying Greenland just for the batteries is just not conscious. You know what I mean? So we can walk back into the garden, I think, consciously, but it's going to take a bit of work. Sorry, that was a little bit.
No, I think that's a very useful. Those are all useful thoughts, and I think you're speaking to the paradox, right? That Schiller is kind of looking at as he's surveying these ages, right? And like in the naive, right? I mean, a lower level way to think about it would be that we just need to go back to these things. Like for some it's like right, there's the god of we need a god of thunder again. I think it was like John Crow Ransom wrote The Fugitives. Like, man stopped fearing God, right? And so but he didn't even really, these aren't religious people. They're more imperialists, but they think that the god of thunder is very important because man became, lost his humility and started, the slaves, we said we shouldn't have slaves on the fields and stuff, but like nature has its own hierarchy. Like they say a lot of stuff. They have a lot of ideas. So yeah, but C.S. Lewis, interestingly, he said, every simple God-fearing man must also be a theologian, and every theologian must also be a simple God-fearing man. I think that's a more useful way to think about it. I think that goes more in the right direction. In that, number one, there's always mystery, right? We always must be humbled by the things we don't know. And in a sense, knowledge of what we don't know is arguably a higher form of knowledge than knowledge of any particular of the things that we do know. And discovery, as even Plato gets at, right, is how are we discovering things that we don't know? Like, what is a discovery really? Because if you're discovering something you didn't know, then how would you know it's the thing when you finally discover it? You didn't know it. How do you know that's the thing you were looking for? You must have had some knowledge of it, if somehow, some intimation of it. There must have been something inside you that already predisposed you to coming to know a thing, such that you could look for it outside yourself, even when you didn't know what you were looking for. And so the known and the unknown is the unknown is really, the known is just a special kind of unknown. We may have more details, but the truth remains absolute, and no amount of details gets to the simple truth. And so when you're talking about complexity, I think, yeah, it's easy. The details are infinite. So the more details there are, the easier it is to get lost in the details and lose sight of the simple truth. And I think great art is really about getting back to the simple truths, but with an ability to treat the most complex themes, right? Like a great piece of art is infinitely complex, but it's also infinitely simple, right? In its ideas. And so what does Schiller say? And the muses and altar, both holy and chaste, preserve for their silent thanksgiving. And what had been noble and decent, embraced in woman's shy bosom, kept living. The flame of sweet song kindled upward anew, when the troubadours chanted of love so true. Now women and singers must plait a sweet banked. They work it and weave it forever, encircling the fair and just hand in hand, a tie that no mortal can sever. For singing in love, wed in beauty and truth. Keep life ever bright with the sparkle of youth. Beauty on its own, I mean, it's nice, it's beautiful, right? But the whole thing that Plato, I think, what he's getting at is, we can imitate reality, we can imitate beautiful things and represent nature, but it doesn't mean those representations are capturing something true. Like you could capture all sorts of suffering and and put all sorts of ugly images of like ugly human beings acting in ugly ways. But would that really sum up humanity for you? And then so this idea of, well, how do we know if the images are representative of reality, or just an imitation of it, of the real thing, or just an imitation of the real thing? And so Plato criticized Homer. He criticized the poets of his age, and he saw how poetic language, distilled into forms of rhetoric, of nice speech and beautiful imagery, or imagery that would amp people up, stuff, war propaganda, old school style, cuckolded kings and all sorts of things, stolen princesses. Beauty without truth is, it's a dangerous road, right? But what is truth? Truth on its own, sure, there's all sorts of things out there, but right, Plato in his Laws, which is one of the last works he wrote, right? It's where he gets at the point that he's thinking about how to educate society, having done all his thought experiments in the Republic and elsewhere. And he makes the point, children, how do we instill in children a love for the real thing, for goodness, truth, and beauty, and not one without the other? Since something could be beautiful, but not true, right? And then it's just outwardly pleasing, but it could be deadly. It could be mortal. Or something might be presented as good, right? Let's help the children in Ukraine, right? And then it's, he starts, so we need to deliver more weapons for the Ukrainians to protect themselves, right? These are just propagandists looking to keep the war going. So goodness and beauty without truth is quite dangerous. Or truth and beauty, but without goodness, right? Like what is our ultimate aim? There are a lot of realities and things that we could do and present, but are, to what ends are we presenting these things? And so Plato makes the point that the first thing that children have knowledge is knowledge of pleasure and pain. And the knowledge of wisdom and goodness and truth come later. The first thing they know is pleasure and pain. And so he said, how do we instill in people a desire for actual goodness, truth, and beauty, and not one without the other, essentially? And so he talks about dancing and singing. And he makes the point that the children should learn not only to dance well, that their craft and they're technically, that people dance well and that people sing well, but that the dance and singing is itself good and representative of good, right? It represents something good. And so it's a twofold thing where the idea is people enjoy it. Beauty awakens that desire for these higher forms, right, of wisdom, of goodness. I think of an emblem that Da Vinci made, beauty adorns virtue, right? That beauty is there to adorn good things, beautiful, the truth. And that if you don't, right, and we could just say, okay, that sounds very like whatever, didactic or tyrannical. Okay, so what happens though when we can start to make dangerous things beautiful? We start to make all sorts, you can present all, and this is the world we live in, right? You could sell all sorts of things and make it very appealing. but the survival of a civilization comes down to whether we can distinguish clever imitations of goodness, truth, and beauty from the real thing. Right? No, if the images and things we're actually being presented are actually an embodiment of the real thing and not just clever imitations. So what's needed for that? You know, and so Schiller here, I'll read you this and I'll read a quote. So now women and singers must play to sweet bank, they work it and weave it forever, encircling the fair and just hand in hand, a tie that no mortal can sever. For singing and love, wed in beauty and truth, keep life ever bright with the sparkle of youth. The truth remains ever simple, right? And the most beautiful thing is ultimately has a sublime simplicity to it, right? The greatest works of art. And so Schiller, he says, the great quote, called, this is an epigram called The Fountain of Youth. Trust me, the fountain of youth, it is no fable. It is running truly and always. Ye ask where? In poetical art. That was a bit deadpan delivery on the last part there, but in poetical art. So, you know, I just going back to the think of all the magic of youth fades, right? Schiller's talking the sparkle of youth. The magic of youth per se fades. The magic of everything of this world fades, right? And we all want to regain that. So there's a big magic industry, right? Entertainment, pleasure, stuff. So, but uniquely in art is the realm of the ideal, where we can actually have these things presented in a way that they're untainted by, Schiller says, by the pollutions and the vortex that is the worldly. And that becomes a reminder of that thing that's already there, right? Which I think we said at the beginning. We're not really discovering anything new per se. We're just learning more about what had always been there, such that the mysteries are just becoming clearer to us. And that's exciting. I think that's exciting. That makes me less hungry for like the other stuff that I know the magic's going to fade. I know the magic of all the other stuff's going to fade. And
Can
so,
I ask a question?
yeah.
When you say magic, I mean, are you talking like enchantment, re-enchantment, or is it another, you know, because when I think of magic, I don't get a very good.
Well, I think it takes many
image.
forms. Like I just think like things that like you can magically you know this theme often in modern times in the other discussions I did with Matt, right? We're talking about like neurolinguistic programming and propaganda, like even in the wow, this conversation just took a dark turn. But like no, we're talking about the magicians and psyops, and how the idea of the magicians and magic is really a reference within the Intel world. The illusionists, right? Houdini, actually, I read some crazy stuff. Like these entertainers and these so-called magicians that do all sorts of tricks, like they're not just entertainers. A lot of them, but those types embody this idea of the magician, the intelligence people that are able to create illusions, but they're doing all sorts of things in the background that we don't know about. So these are illusions and spectacle. But how do you create illusions, right? It becomes like a science for the illusionists, for the magicians. And the Brave New World. What is Soma? What is a Soma culture? Right? It's you take a magical pill and you feel good. What are drugs? Right? If not a kind of, well, I mean, there's good drugs and bad drugs. We could go there forever. Take your heart medication, that's not what we're saying. But they're forms of transforming one state, right? Of feeling. And so we have, and the Brave New World is just flooding people with it, such that there's no shortage, right? There's just so much choice. There's so much magic, right? There's always something new to entertain you and distract you from those deeper whisperings, from that deeper thing. And what's the magic of that? When we start to tap into that, how does that also have magical transformations on ourselves, on us and others? And what happens when we all start to tap into that, right? And to become like awe-inspired children, right? To be awed by the mystery and uniqueness of each of our souls, and that everybody has a soul, and everybody has this infinite fount, right, of beauty, truth, and goodness that they can access, that will change them if they can only be made aware that it's even there, and not be distracted by all the fake magic. So yeah, I think Schiller, it's all in that last stanza for me. It's that kind of the wedding of these things. That's what I'd say. I mean, we could go on, but Actually, I mean, the last thought I had actually was to read just some new poems that I think capture the kind of thing we spoke about in new poems, since the whole point is we need new good art. We need stuff that does that today. And right, I was speaking with somebody who's actually a pretty well-established or an impressive person in the poetry world, like a actual, good, talented person. And he made the point, if you have ideas, but the other side has artists, we were talking about the culture wars, it says if you have good ideas, but the other side has artists, you lose. And so Tim Dillon, who's a podcaster that I really like, and I also listen to a bit, for a lot of people it's in doses, but you need him in doses. But he made the point, what's the typical thing after the Grammys? All the conservative folk are like, oh, the Satanists are trying to convert our children. And it's kind of true. But at the same time, they're complaining that all the culture is corrupt, but yet they don't produce anything themselves. And they're complaining that the stuff is corrupting their children. And he's like, well, why don't you educate your children then? They don't have to watch the Grammys. Why are they watching the Grammys? It's like nobody's watching the Grammys except for like maybe a few, conservative folk that are looking to get amped up about Satanism. And he just made the point, a lot of these people that we say, or that are accused of Satanists, he's like, they're not Satanists. Satanists believe in something. These people don't believe in anything. They just, they're there to make money. They're there to have attention. But yeah, I mean, as long as we don't have great art and we don't have things that embody this idea, we can complain all we want, or we can have all the best ideas in the world. But that ain't the real thing, is it? So yeah, I did want to maybe just read, but I don't know if people have thoughts. That'll be maybe the finisher. There was by some compelling poets that touches on this theme of recapturing childhood in fun ways. But if anybody has thoughts or questions, I haven't checked the comments. Now's a good time to just key in. do people want to hear some, do we want to conclude with an original poetic offering?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
So this first one, I'll read three, right? They're short. So this first one is by a Welsh poet, a man who writes in a cabin by himself, living in Wales, who retired in the 90s after an injury and just joined a creative writing group. You know, he wasn't one of these, I'm going to be a poet. I want to be a writer, and all this, you know, which is like the careerist stuff that we have today all the time. And so this is a nice piece. So this is called Lemon Soap by Roland Hughes. So this was written in the last few years, if not this year. Lemon soap. My grandmother loved lemon soap. It was her special Christmas indulgence. The tin bath pulled comfortably close to the coal fire, a torn square of towel for a flannel, and her precious soap, still wrapped in its original paper, placed carefully onto a bone china saucer. The ritual was serene. Her long gray hair tied back from neck and face, she lathered her body as though bathing a newborn baby. At this time, she was special to herself, frequently lifting the soap to her nose, as though smelling an exotic rose. Holding the firelight in her eyes, the old body dissolved into the water, and a child crept into her skin. Her world lost in a time of stillness and thought. This was her moment of light. A china doll, taken from its box and nursed awake with love. So that was Roland Hughes. Now, I mean, for me, the image of what beautiful contrast, right? Elderly grandmother, you know, treating herself like a child, taking care of that inner child, you could say. Having a love for that of self in a good way.
I could actually feel the fragrance coming out of the poem.
Yeah.
Then we have let's go here. I'll read one by Daniel Leach, who is my friend. So call me biased, but I think he's got some good stuff. Things that key on the theme here. And actually, yeah, I know what we'll close out with a banger. So this is this pre-conclusion. We're close to the end here. This one's called Dog Dreams. I'm reading it from my screen. Dog Dreams. Unless, do I send you the link, Pascal, and we show it, or can I just read it? Are people good with me just reading it, or they want to see it? See the text.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'll just read the text. It's okay. It's 3 stanzas. Dog Dreams by Daniel Leach, who lives in Texas. Last I knew. Sometimes I imagine that I'm still young, like an old sleeping dog in his dreams. His legs move, and he pants at the air with his tongue as he chases an object which seems to embody the world of his hopes and desires, and all that he ever could be. For that vision of beauty still somehow inspires the young animal sleeping in me. But I know now my animal powers have waned, and that object will never be caught, and that dream in itself, though never attained, is the essence of what I once sought. So that now I look calmly and kindly on things that once caused a storm in my heart, and stop to consider what each moment brings, as if it were some small work of art. The wind in the treetops, the laugh of a child, of anything happy and free, though their blessings in my life have not always smiled, have never been sweeter to me. And that beautiful sadness we sometimes will feel when old music will make our heart melt, though it's fleeting, is somehow more precious and real than what a young heart ever felt. Isn't that nice?
Mhm. Yeah.
The simplest stop and smell the roses. I mean, it's a kind of much more refined and profound way of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. So I was thinking, yeah, the magic of youth fades. And I mean, my interaction with the world, let's say the places I go where I just see everyday folks going about their everyday lives, right? So I go to the gym and you can see it in people's eyes, right? Like, they're like still like young guys, they're in shape and stuff, but they're getting a bit, like you're not 20 anymore, man. Their animal powers are waning a bit, and that's okay. No need to panic, but there is a panic, and there's an attempt to regain that youth. And I mean, this is not new. But yeah, I guess in my mind, the fear is what happens if you don't. The difference is what happens if you have nothing in the bank, right? If you've really, spiritually speaking, and if you've just been chasing that magic, that the magic of youth, which I mean, you don't really have to try. It's just kind of there, and you just and then I was thinking, like, the thing about young folks and about people, and I mean, we could say this about all humans, it's automatic motivations. Like what's an 18-year-old? They don't know anything. They're full of vitality, though. They have, there's still plenty of potential and imagination and hunger and desire. So those are the virtues. Those are the good things they have going for them. They don't know anything. They haven't contributed anything, really, like they're potential still in like a form where it's time to start doing something. But it's largely all still automatic, right? Like most people, our lives are automatic motivations. We go to work, we did it. How much of this stuff are we really present for? Are we really thinking about? How much of it is just routine? Right. And then the desire for magic is really the desire to transcend, right? To escape the ordinary and the normal. But then the question is, how do you really do that? Once the magic of youth and like the simpler, easier things that you don't really have to think about, you got to then. That's where it's like, well, what does one have in the bank? Did one love beauty, truth, and goodness? Was that something that was inspired in us from an early age? Through poetry, right? Through stories, through all sorts of great things. One of the last things Socrates did, as my friend John pointed out in an email, was set Aesop to verse. And Plato and Socrates were very admiring of Aesop, right? The Ethiopian slave. Or apparently this is what, because his stories were closer to the real thing. His fables were closer to the real thing in their wedding of beauty, truth, and goodness than say, a lot like say a Sappho, who, however, the virtuosity is just mind blowing. And from a craftsmanship standpoint, she's just, I mean, it's in a sense hard to beat. She lyric, comes from Sappho, right? The lyric poets. So it's set to the lyre. So music and poetry, and she was an accomplished musician. So this was serious stuff. She was and yet the humble fables which I revisited. And after my friend Adam Sedia, who's also here, he had been reading them to his kid, right, to his son. And all that to say, yeah, and so Socrates at the end of his life was, what was he? He's like, I'm trying to set it to verse. So yeah, I think great art, these things allow us to do that in a way that few things can, right? And to capture that magic and make it a conscious object of attention, and to remind us that we have it inside ourselves too, you know, if we can only remember. And that's an invaluable thing to have. You know, if people really want to fight bad guys and ugliness, you can't really do that by just criticizing ugliness and badness, right? You can only really fight it with goodness and beauty and truth. And not one without the other. So that makes me appreciate Plato. Like, wow, that's pretty, he got pretty darn close to the to the real thing, it seems. And I think Schiller in his poetry very much embodies that too. And The Four Ages of the World is a historical thought poem that does it in an interesting way, as on a more cerebral level, I'd say, but still very beautiful. So yeah, I mean, we've been going on for a while. Do we want a closer? I'm bad. I'm like, it's like yes or yes, right? I pretty much just forced myself here. Okay, there's one that's longer. Let's just do this. Okay. This one's by Caitlin Johnstone. Some people may be familiar with her. She's a journalist, and she's also a pretty interesting and fine poet in her own right, that I would highly recommend. And this is one that I think is very nice. It's called A Blessing for Everyone by Caitlin Johnstone. I'll read it from my phone. May all of your illusions be shattered beyond your ability to reassemble them. May you learn quickly from your failures and successes. May life treat you how you treat life. May you reap swiftly that which you sow, and may it be highly educational for you. May all of the hidden parts of yourself enter the light. May all of your unfelt feelings be felt. May you have a crystal clear glimpse of your own boundlessness. May you have a crystal clear glimpse of your own insignificance. May your inner monologue cease, and may you experience stillness. May you experience the beauty of each moment that the babbling mind eclipses. May you uncover the mystery that hides behind the veil of separation. May you know true courage. May you know true wisdom. May you know true humility. May you know true truth. May you know yourself intimately, without disguises or distortions. May you meet the world lucidly, without projections or prejudices. May you perceive the world clearly, without filters or fantasies. May your delusions disappoint you, and may authenticity astonish you. May everything you have constructed in untruth crumble before your eyes. May life conspire to unmake every false object you have made. May you live each moment fully, not for the goal of grandiose achievement, but for living itself. May you truly, deeply see yourself and find there what you've always been looking for. May you be truly, deeply seen by someone else. May you let yourself be seen by them. May you end your war against the feminine. May you finally let in the enormity of what your mother did for you. May you find a home in your body. May your body feel at home on this earth. May the earth feel your sorrow. May you feel the earth's forgiveness. May the earth feel your gratitude. May the earth feel your love. May the thrum of the earth dance through you. May you fall in love with that dance. Amen. It's a nice tearing down illusions. The thought, last thought, I refuse to say anything after this. Having read this poem, the thought that came to mind, having read Nicholas of Cusa and his discussion of the infinite and God. God is the absolute absence of all contradictions. And so every time we remove an illusion, as Caitlin is so passionate about doing, we move closer to God, to the real thing, and to our own true self. That's how I like to think about it.
I think Sam had something to add to the discussion. Sam Phillip, you're muted.
Go ahead.
We can't hear you right now, Sam.
He wants to read a short Celtic blessing.
But he's muted.
Am I supposed to fix that, or?
The host can.
I can't.
Oh, you have to unmute. If that was whoever, Sam, if that's,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm
there you
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I have this a Celtic blessing. I always keep it with me. I love it, and I would like to share it with you if you're not familiar with it.
Sure, go ahead.
May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rain fall soft upon your field. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
That's a good reminder. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I love it.
Oh, it's nice.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
I'm looking at the comments now. Okay.
We lost some people, but
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean,
most of them
I said all I have to say, and
right till the end. That's good.
I was telling Matt I had no idea what I was going to talk about, so I was just I didn't know what I was going to do. I just had notes. I just had like a stew. So yeah, I mean, thank you everybody, and I'm looking forward. What's up next week? What are we expecting? Jared, do you know?
I'm
Pascal.
gonna be presenting. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I still have to send you the other.
Yeah.
Now I can send it. Now my brain is less.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I'm
So
waiting.
yeah,
for-
I'm helping Pascal with the translation. So he's gonna be what do you preview?
We're gonna look at poetry also, but in a different way. Poetry and arts, messages from the past, intemporal messages. Let's put it like that.
Intemporal messages. That sounds interesting. Okay, sold.
Good. Now I have to compose that. Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I mean, let's give it up for our hostess, dual hosts, hostai,
All right.
Jerry and Madeline.
Yeah. Good. So we'll see you next week, I guess. Huh?
Okay.
À
Okay.
bientôt. We'll all talk soon. Ciao, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
And thank
Hey,
you.
thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Had
Bye.
fun.